In this video, I will be providing you with some fence design and planning tips, or in other words, things you should consider before building the fence. And the first thing on the list will be the property lines, because the last thing you want to do is have your fence located in a spot where you're going to give your neighbor some more land, or they're going to take some land from you. And what we're looking at here is a simple plot plan, and this will provide you with the borders of your property. However, in some cases, if those lines get a little crazy, then you might need to contact a surveyor to provide you with the exact location. Next up on the list, and this will depend upon your property, will be to figure out if there are any underground utility lines that could create problems for you locating your fence posts. And this will be a bigger problem if you're drilling 2, 3, or 4 foot holes into the ground to avoid problems with the ground freezing that could push your fence posts up and damage the fence. And even though they might be able to tell you where the water and the sewer lines are located, they might not be able to do that on older homes. And to find these lines, most of the time you call Dig Alert, and their phone number can usually be found on the internet, and they will mark these utility lines with paint or chalk. And keep in mind that these lines could be off a little bit. So if you have a paint line coming down here and a fence post that needs to be right here, and you're going to use power equipment, then you're probably going to think twice and need to hand dig this area, and if necessary, relocate the post. And here's an example of where it could be a problem if you have the lines running through the area where you're going to install the new fence. The next thing you're going to need to be aware of will be whether or not you need any building permits. And most of the time you don't need a building permit to build a 6 foot tall wood fence. However, if you're going to build one 6 foot and 4 inches and your neighbor complains about it, guess what? You could have a problem with your local building inspector. Next up on the list, and this is another biggie, is whether or not you're going to be able to build a fence that's going to be as straight as you need it to be, because the ground in your yard isn't flat and you might have some low spots in it, and these low spots might need to be filled. Or you can build a fence that matches the terrain, but in some cases the terrain will actually need to work with the fence. So something like this doesn't look that bad. However, if you have some property that has too many variations in the soil, then you might need to get some heavy equipment in there and flatten out the yard. And of course, that fence might end up looking something like this with a slight slope to it. However, the top of the fence would be nice and straight, or something like this where the top of the fence is level and steps down at every post. However, this design right here will create gaps at the bottom of the fence that might need to be filled, and it's going to be a lot better for you to figure this out before the fence is built and not after. And next up on the list will be privacy, because I've built a lot of fences where the people complained about the gaps in between the fences or any other gaps because for whatever reason they could not wrap their mind around the fact that lumber shrinks. And I will put a link here to a playlist that will provide you with a few different designs if you're looking for privacy. Next, try to figure out what type of wood you're going to use, because sometimes the cheapest lumber isn't going to provide you with the best value, and this would include considering pressure treated posts or even the 2x railing for the bottom and top rails that the fencing boards attach to. Which would lead me to the next question. You're going to need to try and figure out what the fence is going to look like in 5 or 10 years, because this seems to be another problem people have who somehow think that a particular fence with a certain type of lumber or other types of building materials won't fade, discolor, or leave you, the homeowner, a little unhappy a few years down the road. And this next one might not seem like that big of a deal to people who don't own any pets. However, for those of you who do own pets, this could be a problem. So make sure that these pets are placed in an area that will not be creating problems for the fence builders. Next up on the list would be any additional materials or labor that might be required for whatever reason, and both neighbors might not agree that it would be their responsibility or that it would have anything to do with building the fence. For example, here's a situation where metal needed to be added to the bottom of the fence because this neighbor on this side has raised the back part of their yard. And this tip could apply to a wide variety of different problems, like leveling out the property or regrading it just so the fence could be built. Which would lead us to our next problem, and that would be any trees, plants, or shrubbery that is growing next to the fence, or like this plant here, could be in the way of putting the fencing on the other side. Now, I wouldn't have brought this one up here if I didn't have a story to tell, because I remember one time a neighbor complaining about a plant that was on his property when it was actually on his neighbor's property because the fence wasn't located in the right spot. For example, this bush right here might look like it belongs to this neighbor here. However, if the property line is over here, because the fence was built in the wrong spot, then this neighbor here could actually complain and suggest that this plant, even though they planted it, isn't going to be their responsibility and instead will be the neighbor over here's responsibility, all because the fence wasn't located in the right spot. And for our last tip in this video, even though these are not going to be all the problems you could run into, and with that said, feel free to leave any stories or problems you ran into when planning or designing a wood fence in the video comment area for everyone to see and learn from. And even though I have been mentioning this tip throughout the video, I saved what I would consider to be the most difficult tip for some neighbors. And that's going to be getting paid from your neighbor or somehow agreeing to a method of payment that is going to be fair for both neighbors. And if you remember from the title of this video, it's all about planning and designing. And I wouldn't start this project at all until you know who's going to be chipping in and when you're going to get paid, or when you are responsible for paying someone else to build or rebuild a fence on your property. So with that said, let's go ahead and wrap the video up, and I will be putting links to other videos as I make them throughout the videos and in the video description box.